And we have begun. Well, welcome all. Welcome to the 2020 UNCG McNair Virtual Summer Research Symposium. We have our second panel today with our scholars who will share a bit about their summer research experience with McNair. My name is Carla Forward. I am the Assistant Director of the UNCG McNair program. And thank you all again, scholars, for being here, for our attendees who are slowly but surely coming in and joining us. And so just to give you some context and some background, the scholars today will share a little bit about their summer research experience, share a bit about their research topics, and we'll engage in a conversation about not only what they learned, but perhaps what they would have done differently and some of the plans they have moving forward about their research with the McNair Scholars Program. A little bit of context: the McNair Scholars Program is a federal funded program as part of the overall TRIO programs, which supports high achieving students who also identify as first generation college students or first generation low income college students, and or students from underrepresented racial backgrounds, with the goal of engaging these students in undergraduate research to give them some exposure and support as they pursue PhD degrees. Central to our mission for the McNair Scholars Program, the scholars engage in the Summer Research Institute, which is an intensive 8-week experience which is meant to simulate what it might look like at the graduate level pursuing PhDs, recognizing that research is, can be months long, weeks long, months long, year long, or multiple years. These scholars engaged in research at minimum 8 weeks. Some has been engaging in their respective research for a little bit longer than that. In addition to their research hours, they also participated in classes that were preparing them for GRE tests, exposing them to the graduate school application process, as well as a writing class to support them with their writing for research. So today, I'm excited to have our scholars share in the second panel, share a little bit about who they are and their research, and we will begin. I'll start with who's on my screen in order, if that's fair. I'm gonna ask you as scholars, and then again, as I ask the question, I'll put this in the chat box. If you can share your name, your year, and your major, as well as briefly describe your research, your research topic and your research project over the summer. And I'll start with Sarah.
Hello everyone, my name is Sarah Ragab. I am a senior kinesiology student, and my research was on the implementation and outcomes of a restorative practices physical education program and its impact on a high school that experiences high rates of in and out of school suspension, absenteeism, and interpersonal conflict.
Next, I have scholar Leighann.
Hi everyone, my name is Leighann Brooks, and I am a senior majoring in middle grades education with a concentration in social studies and double minors in political science and history. My research topic is on the importance of cultural camaraderie and eliminating disequilibrium within the classroom. And in a nutshell, that's basically about how students of color are affected when they have white teachers.
Thank you. Scholar Manny.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Manny Valdez. I am a senior majoring in history. My research title for my project was Latino Underrepresentation, Bridging the Equity Gap for Mexican Students within the U.S. Public Education System. So this project looked at how the many inequities within the public education system affected Latinx students. This also helped shed light on how the Latinx story was contributed towards the building of America and how it was voided out and how it affected the educational pathways of many Latinx students.
Thank you. Scholar Zhariah.
Hi everyone, my name is Zhariah Haire, and I am a current senior in the psychology department. My research was on the Marley hypothesis, which is basically a phenomenon that suggests that the perception gap of racism is due to the lack of knowledge. So over the summer, I did a research on providing an education intervention boost. Basically just an audio clip to participants to see after the audio clip if they learned anything more and if they're able to perceive systemic racism.
Thank you. Scholar Joy.
Hi, everybody. My name is Joy Woods. I'm a senior international business and political science double major with a minor in Japanese and Asian studies. My research project was on the impacts of an aging population on Japanese immigration policy in the late 20th and early 21st century, and just looking at how aging populations affect the amounts and types of immigrants that countries let in, specifically in Japan.
Thank you. And Scholar Tatyana.
Hi everyone, my name is Tatyana Farrow. I'm a upcoming senior, and my major is psychology with a minor in American Sign Language. My project was about how children view socioeconomic status as a way to depict who has what job, meaning would they have a white collar job or a blue collar job, which is more physical labor. And we kind of depicted that with having people live at the top of the hill and the bottom of the hill to depict socioeconomic status without revealing that to the children.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all. And so just again, as a recap for our attendees, thank you for our new attendees who are joining. The scholars will engage in a panel discussion, have about 3 to 4 questions to get you to talk a little bit more about your research and your summer research experience. Our attendees, I ask you, you will get an opportunity to talk with and engage with our scholars as well. At the end of the panel discussion, I invite you to ask questions that you may have in the question Q&A function, also in the chat box. We encourage you to send encouraging words to our panelists in the chat box as well. And I am in the chat box, I will send a link to the Google site where you can see all of the formal presentations from our scholars, where they have YouTube videos of their research. They will not represent those, but you will get an opportunity to see their research projects and presentations a little bit more in depth at the site. So, scholars, the next question, you engage in an 8-week experience, some a little bit longer, some of you are continuing. You came into the summer having an idea of what you wanted to study. And so can you share a bit about what did you learn? What did you learn while you were conducting your study? And perhaps what surprised you about your topic and or the research process? And I can go in a screen order as well. If we can start with Sarah.
All right, so what I learned during my SRI experience, I honestly learned about the multi-contextuality of restorative practices through my literature review. I was able to go in depth about the different uses of restoration. What surprised me about the research process was how ongoing it is. So, for example, my background information changed in the year that I have been doing the research. For example, the first year that I've been doing the research, African American students were 4.1 times more likely to be suspended than white students. And then the next year, they were 5.2 times more likely. So it's crazy how things change like that. Out of the suspensions, I think 71.2 or 3% of those suspensions in Guilford County were African Americans and African American students, and that increased to 73.6%. And African American students are only 40% of the Guilford County student population. So the 40% never changed, but the numbers increased from the other areas. So it's crazy how research is ongoing and you can honestly update your research every year with the changes that has been happening. So I think that surprised me the most, how things changed like that and how the necessity for positive change in school environments has increased.
Thank you, Sarah. And like, good point. It's ever changing, which speaks to the significance of research and continuing to do these types of studies. Leighann, can you share a little bit about what you learned? And yeah, what perhaps surprised you?
The thing that I learned the most is just how bad the disconnect is between public school students of color and their teachers. I went to public school all my life, and I knew a little bit about it, like seeing it firsthand, but like watching videos of nationally board certified teachers who are supposed to be the best of the best and like seeing the way that they interact with their students honestly kind of blew my mind, because I like teachers on that platform are supposed to be like stellar, like the model that you follow, and seeing how they interacted with their students like really pushed it forward for me that it's like way worse than I ever thought it would be. um that's also pretty much the thing that surprised me the most, was just how bad things have gotten and how it really seems like no one is trying to make things better, especially with the current climate of our world. Like with the whole COVID thing and like trying to figure out what school is going to look like for the next couple of years. I can only see this problem getting worse unless someone steps up and is like, this is what we need to do and this is how we're going to do it.
Thank you. How about you, Manny?
The biggest part that, the biggest things that I learned about through the whole SRI was learning more about like my personal identity, identifying as a Latinx scholar or Latinx student. It helped me realize all the Latinx history that wasn't taught in schools and that no one ever really talks about. It helped me kind of get in touch with my culture, and it helped me get in touch with my identity. Since one of the things I talked about in my research was students conforming to Americanist ideals, and I too was a victim of, conforming to those American ideals in the world today because I didn't know any of my history. So this project helped me get back in touch with my history and what it really meant. And one of the biggest things that surprised me was just how much of the Latinx history was voided out and all the major contributions that are never told or talked about. And that just surprised me a lot, as well as the constant revisions throughout this whole process. I think throughout the whole SRI, it really taught me a lot about revisions. I was revising my paper and revising everything like every week with my faculty mentor and my library mentor. So the revision process was definitely really eye-opening.
Thank you. Yeah, you really touched upon something significant, that research not only helps you learn and reveals some content about your topic, but perhaps even learning about yourself and your paradigm as a researcher. Thanks for that, Manny. How about you, Zhariah?
Honestly, I've learned a lot throughout SRI. I wasn't able to actually run my study yet. I'll be doing so next week. But just looking through my lit review and then the past research, it's just kind of shocking that a lot of people haven't really studied the Marley hypothesis, being that there's only 4 or 3 research studies on it. So it was just really interesting, the lit review. And then there was only one that did an intervention phase, which is similar to mine. And then their results from it was very interesting, that if we are able to educate individuals, there is a higher chance that the perception gap can diminish.
Thank you. Yeah, very significant. And Leighann, you spoke to this as well. Just the work that you're doing is adding to perhaps topics that are not looked at in a particular lens. And so it's important, the work that you're doing. And we'll continue to look at the chat box. We have some of our panelists that are sharing some resources for you as scholars. So take a look. Scholar Joy, what did you learn? What surprised you?
I think one of the biggest things that I learned was basically how immigration problems look very similar in other countries. You wouldn't think that a country like Japan, that a lot of people think is very, very different from the United States, would be so similar. They had an immigration program specifically for second, third, and fourth generation Japanese people living abroad, so that they could come back to Japan and learn about their culture and history, but it was becoming a way to get cheap labor. And most of the people that came back to Japan were from countries like Brazil and Peru, these mostly, Hispanic countries, Latinx countries. And so these people were being taken advantage of in Japan. And so it's interesting, I found it very interesting to learn about how we see similar strains of problems. That was a topic I didn't expect to have to delve into, but there was more resources in Spanish and in Portuguese than there was in English for a lot of the topics that I was researching, just because of how broad it was. Something that surprised me was the fact that there wasn't a lot of research in this area. I think one of the most recent articles that I could find on the topic that I did in particular was from 2009, and none of it had been updated. Japan has had a new prime minister since then and a new economic program. So I found it really surprising that no one had thought to document some of these changes. Japan is the oldest country in the world. If it wasn't for the fact that their older people weren't passing away, life expectancy in Japan is 89 years. If it wasn't for that, Japan would be shrinking at 36% per year. And by the year 2500, there would be 1,000 Japanese people left. So it's very important, I think, to research what's going to happen not only in Japan, Italy is second. And the US is also reaching the aging population. So it's a good case study to watch out for the future. So I think I was mostly surprised that no one was already doing this research.
Thank you. So not only filling the gap in research, but recognizing how there's some overlap or transference in other communities, other countries, other areas. How about you, Tatyana? What did you learn? What perhaps surprised you?
The most surprising thing happened when we did our study for adults as well. We practiced with them at first, and they answered the stereotypical way, saying the low economic status people could only be builders and the high class people could only be like doctors, etc., come up with the ideas. And when we tried it on younger kids, ages 6 and 7, they did the opposite. They said the high status people were builders and the low status were idea makers. And this trend changed when they reached 10 to 12. But it was really fascinating with their answers because at 6 and 7, their answers weren't really developed. But when they became like 8 and 9 is when they said, well, I believe they're this because they looked at what they owned. And then when they turned 10 and 12, they looked at their characteristics and their personality traits. Like we had a participant say, well, I just think that they can be both because I think everybody has a fair chance to do something, even if they don't have the resources, they still can come up with ideas or they can find resources in their neighborhood to build stuff. We had another child kind of look at it as, well, the people who live at the top of the hill already have the resources to build, so they should be the ones who build, and the people who are at the bottom, they don't have as much resources, so they're probably the idea makers. It was like their responses really took me and my mentor back because we weren't really expecting that. Because when we ran it on like people who were 18 and older, it was just like the generic answers of like, this is kind of how we assumed life would be. And we're still trying to figure out the gap of where it becomes these certain people have these certain jobs, because at the ages we're looking at, they don't specifically do that trend yet. So I thought that was really fascinating to see and look at.
Thank you. So again, our research is forever changing as our communities and our perhaps participants change, seeing some new themes surface. Thank you all again for your responses and for your reflections about your experience and your learning moments. So I want you to think about this next question, recognizing that research is ongoing and ever-changing. And perhaps what would you have done differently with what you know now? If you had unlimited resources, we recognize, and to give you context, attendees, you all know this, we are in the midst of a pandemic. Kudos and shout out to our scholars who continue to engage in their research remotely. In past, the Summer Research Institute would be an on-campus experience where they have access to the library, access to labs, access to their communities in ways to do their research differently. So I ask you to share, if you had unlimited resources, if circumstances were different, if we're not in a pandemic, but even outside of that, perhaps if you had an abundance of research funds, an abundance of time, more than 8 weeks, if things were different, what would you have done differently? What could have been done differently with your research? And I'll start you all in alphabetical order by last name. So perhaps Leighann, if you could start us off.
If there's anything that I could change with like unyielding power, it would probably be making COVID not exist, just so that I could get in the classroom and I could see these things firsthand. I spoke a little bit about it in my research paper. For my future implications, I would have loved to just spend months and months in North Carolina or in different states, going around and spending like at least a week in a classroom with minority majority students and their white teacher, just to see like along a long period of time what the relationship looked like, how the students were affected by the instructional practices. Just getting the chance to even form a relationship with the students for a short period of time, and maybe even getting to interview them about how they felt in their classroom, if they felt included, if they felt accepted, if they felt safe even. So that would definitely have been the like number one thing that I would have done. And without any kind of barriers, anything like that, I would have loved to get more people involved. Like there's so many people just within our school of education at UNC Greensboro who are incredibly like interested in my topic. And I would have loved to get them involved and branched out even more, and to just visited schools, visited new people, and collected all that information so that I would be able to synthesize it better.
Thank you. And yes, I see Jennifer, you added, I was going to say, perhaps more of an ethnographic study as an additional to, which would mean like a more longitudinal study. Excuse me, let me find my words, but a little bit more long-term, and I appreciate you mentioning you put that in your paper, to help think about what are the implications to consider in the future. Good job. How about you, Tatyana? What would you have done differently if you had unlimited resources or if circumstances were different?
Without the pandemic, I know I'd have a lot more participants. It's really hard for children to get on the webinar and kind of answer our questions. It's really different than what we're used to. We're used to like going to the Living Lab, which is a museum, whether we go to downtown or we were supposed to go to the zoo. And we're usually getting like 10 participants a day or more than that. And I only have 17 for my entire study for the research in general. And that's really new to me. And we can't really give or like publish my paper that I'm supposed to finish next year fully with all the extra studies that we're doing until I have more participants, because you're supposed to have like a general number set. And we don't yet because it's really hard. You either have people forgetting or they're like distracted. Some of my kids have been at the pool. some of them have had their parents near them, and it's kind of hard for us to see if their parents are like out of the view, out of the room, and not like coaching them how to answer. So that's been kind of hard and difficult to really understand what's going on. Because usually when we do this in person, the parents are kind of far away, and we kind of prompt the parents to be like, hey, don't answer for them, don't look over their shoulder, don't kind of like look at them a certain way. So that's been the difficult part of this study. And I kind of wish COVID really wasn't a thing, like Leighann said, because this would have gone so much easier. Plus, I haven't been able to run my own study. You have to have a school computer with the database information to keep it protected. And I don't have that. So my lab instructor, Mac, actually has been running a couple of our studies and has been doing it. So I haven't been able to actually talk to any of my participants or like really do the hard work besides like putting in the data and writing the form up. So.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, COVID really put a damper, especially on studies that were informed by some participant connections. But you know, part of what I'm hearing though is that you all found ways to adjust and still find some meaningful information to add to your study. How about you, Zhariah? With unlimited resources, other circumstances, perhaps what would you have done differently, and or what, you know, and even how did you adjust?
If we were not in a pandemic environment, I would have definitely looked onto UNCG campus since we are racially diverse, just to see, because within my study, we're only targeting white adults. So I would like to see like the comparison between the different race groups. I would also probably reach out to other researchers who are studying racism or anything, just to see if they could run the study as well, just to see if it's different within like the South compared to the Northwest or the East, you know, just different geographic locations.
Thank you. And Sarah.
So I would like to complete my interview processes. That's what we were in the middle of with our students before COVID. Once COVID happened, it kind of canceled the rest of our interviews, and we were making really good relationships with the students. And I thought that that would really impact our data a bit. Another thing would be when I was doing my video, I noticed that I wanted to do more racial inequality focus in education. Just because of the changes that I saw in my background information, I felt like my paper was more focused on restorative practices in our program. And it kind of opened my eyes to racial inequality in education and bias and no tolerance policies and how that can impact students of color. So I really want to go more in depth on that if I had more time. And I want to have my students be certified or trained by the IIRP, which is the International Institute of Restorative Practices, just so they can continue our work beyond us, me and my research and the research team. Just continuing our work if we have to continue it elsewhere. So continuing it in their school community, making it, hopefully I hope it becomes a part of the curriculum, because I feel like it would change a lot of things.
I'm like so engaged in your responses, I'm forgetting to like unmute myself and go to the next caller. Thank you, Sarah. And Manny, how about you? What would you have done a bit differently in other circumstances or with additional resources?
One of the biggest things I wish I would have done differently or got ahead of the game on was interviewing some of my fellow peers that graduated from high school, or if not, interviewing Latino students in college right now, just to further develop the story of how we had to conform to identities that we may or may not have wanted to. So kind of just adding more to the story, because a lot of this research has to deal with personal accounts and how it affected students. So I wish I would have been able to go back in the classroom and see how these students were actually affected, talk to teachers, talk to, I said, like current students and any faculty and staff to see how the public education system was actually hurting a lot of Latinx students. So trying to develop more of a story.
So I'm hearing again some differences with participant engagement and perhaps some of your methods. How about you, Joy?
I was very lucky that most of my research was not like very person to person. I could just read articles and read like primary documents. Going back, however, if I had had more time or knowing what I know now, I would have loved to like focus on one aspect of my research. I did a very large overview of like the entire problem of aging in Japan and some of the economic and social impacts of it, and then like specific programs. And I could have written 25-page papers on like each individual point because that's how in depth they were. So I would have, and I would still love to go back and do more in-depth research on particular topics in my paper. If I had unlimited resources, learning Japanese would be an investment that I don't think I would regret. I can read and write in Japanese, but not enough to like read immigration law. So learning some more Japanese, you know, maybe taking a Japanese class at the same time or a Japanese law class at the same time, so I could get some of these primary sources and making more connections with people in Japan. I would have loved to do one-on-one interviews. I have a section in my paper about Japanese xenophobia and that's effect on immigration. And I would have loved to do like in-person or just online interviews since I'm not in Japan with both first-generation Japanese people and other Japanese people and their views on immigration.
Thank you. And so several of you kind of spoke to with the things that you would have done differently, perhaps informing how you're thinking about the next steps of your study and of your research. And so that is the question that I have for you. What are your plans moving forward as you consider what you learned, as you consider what surprised you, as you consider some of the things that you would have done differently and how you adjusted? Can you share what are your plans moving forward with your research after SRI? Perhaps it's how you're continuing, how you're planning to further adjust, or just in general, how you're looking to advance your research study. And I'm going to try to do this correctly. Let's probably go in alphabetical order by first name. So I'm going to say that starts with Joy.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Plans moving forward, I talked to my mentor about this. This is one of the longest papers I've ever written, and I do not want to like just throw it on my computer and let it rot. So my plans going forward, of course, would be to get it published and to use this as a jumping off point for my graduate degree. Doing this research has helped me decide what it is I want to specialize in. So I was thinking about getting a master's to figure that out, but now I kind of know that Japanese political economy might be the way for me to go, and that's narrowed down like the schools I need to apply for dramatically. So I think making this kind of a larger study, not necessarily on immigration, but just the ways that Japanese politics affect Japan and the rest of the world, I think would be an incredibly interesting study. So that's probably what I'll want to continue to do, is to continue researching. And even the research of a lot of the people that I was reading their research, and I'm like, oh, they are at this school doing this thing. So I wonder if they're taking students on for me to go to that school. So I think maybe not even necessarily directly continuing with this paper, but it's a good jumping off point for the other things that I'm hoping to do.
Thank you, Joy. How about you, Leighann?
Moving forward, I definitely need to work on my research paper and contributing just more ideas and more sources into that. I've been utilizing some resources from Dr. Beverly Faircloth and her project on belonging. So I've kind of been playing both sides of the fence, sharing some of my research and gaining a lot of her knowledge from that. So moving forward, I definitely want to just refine my research paper and refine my research study and get it to a place where it could eventually be publishable.
Thank you. Manny.
I'd probably go and see if I could get more of those personal accounts, kind of doing my own personal research. So interviewing, like I said, interviewing some of my peers, interviewing current students, and trying to develop more of a story. I think that's one of the things that my paper was lacking, just the more personal account story. So trying to go back, and I probably moving forward, probably trying to do some more interviews, and then hopefully maybe a big long-term goal, get everything published, and possibly maybe make a documentary about everything. So see where it goes after then.
Oh, nice. Shifting that not only from publication, but perhaps even shifting research to a media format. That's really dope. QRST. All right, Sarah. What are your next steps? What are your plans moving forward with your study?
I think mine is very similar to Leighann's, just revising my paper and continuing the research process because it is a process. Just keep fixing it up until I feel like it's ready to be published. I feel like there's a lot of things I can expand on, a lot of things that I can fix, and I'm basically just going to continue my work in fall in order to do that. Another thing I want to do is I want to try out cross-age mentoring programs. So using our previous students to teach our current students and see the outcomes of that.
Okay. And Tatyana.
So I'm working on my paper to be published after I continue working on at least up until our third study. We have some ideas for what we're trying to do for the second, and then for the third, we're just going to see how well the second study kind of goes and where that leads us to seeing if we actually need a third study. Basically, right now, we're trying to see if we can do the second study on the same type of topic, but more in depth, kind of asking children their reasons and like writing down their reasons why, and taking out, I think, a couple of the aspects of the first paper and just kind of seeing like, if this is one person here, like, and this is their background, like, where can they work at? Like, what can they do? That's what we're kind of sort of looking at right now and seeing what the potential study would possibly look like, especially with COVID still going on. So we're just working out all the kinks and stuff at the moment.
Thank you. And as Zhariah is prepping to talk about what she plans on doing moving forward, I ask attendees, I notice there's a few more folks who've logged in, that's awesome. I ask you to start thinking about what questions you have for our panelists. Again, I invite you to ask questions in the Q&A function or in the chat box. So Zhariah and panelists, you know, this will also be an opportunity for you to ask questions of each other. So Zhariah, if you can share your reflections on what are your plans moving forward.
So moving forward within my research, I would like to potentially look at certain limitations that could affect the perception of racism, such as like age. So looking at the difference between older adults and then younger adults. I would really like to go out into the community to try to track down people who could have been a part of the civil rights movement and then newer generations like around 17, 16, just to see the difference there. I also want to look at political affiliation to see if their political affiliation really does help or really does hinder their perception of racism. And then also, once again, just looking at geographic locations and then certain cultural contexts to see what's different or what's being taught in one type of race that helps with the perception of systemic racism that's not being taught in another. And then potentially, depending on research, reaching out towards like school boards just to see if we can start implementing certain guidelines to help diminish this gap.
Thank you. And so we recognize that research is something that just continues, and hopefully this process and this experience gave you not only some exposure as to what it can look like, what it can feel like across all aspects of research, and perhaps what are some ways to move forward, what are some ways to shift and adapt, but ultimately further what you're interested in with your studies. So I don't see questions from our attendees. I do have some additional questions. There were some great questions that were asked in the first panel. Are y'all okay if I ask some other questions as perhaps our attendees think of some questions to ask? So one question that I thought was really cool, perhaps if you can share from your summer research experience, what were some either new skills that you learned or used that will, that you see yourself continuing to use in your academic career?
Can anyone just answer, or are you calling on us?
Oh no, popcorn style, anyone can answer.
I'll go first. Oh, Tati, do you want to go?
I don't care. It's whatever.
Okay, you go.
Okay. So I learned how to write in my major. I never really knew that was really even a thing until I got to college. I just thought we all wrote the same and never changed, et cetera, et cetera. And my mentor, she was reading over my stuff. She goes, well, you have great writing, but this is never going to be like published worthy. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, well, it's not like scholarly enough. And it was just not how you're supposed to write at all. And she started teaching me, and we did it like really small stuff at first, and we grew to writing like the major parts and stuff. And so that's probably the hardest part, is learning how to write in your major, because the styles are very different than what you're used to and what you think is normal and how you're used to, like growing up for like 12 years of writing. Everyone's teaching you no, like you have to do something completely new. And moving forward, I guess, with now being in my major for the last year, and if they have any writings for us that we have to do in the last classes I have to take, at least I know how to write properly, which has been hard in the past and hasn't given me the grades that I needed. I usually got B's, and they always were like, your writing's good, but it's not where it needs to be. And I was always confused about that because they never went into details about how to change it. Shailene was probably like the first professor and mentor I've had to really sit down and teach me everything that I need to know.
Thanks, Tatyana. Any others? Skills you developed, new skills you learned that you will continue to use?
The new skill that I learned was just how to use Zotero. I had never even heard of Zotero before. And my mentor, Jennifer, was like, okay, Leighann, put your sources into Zotero. And I was like, girl, what is Zotero? So having her help me figure out how to use that, it's definitely like made my life so much easier, especially like going into my senior year and knowing that I'm going to have to write like these serious like academic papers. Having Zotero in my back pocket is amazing, especially because it's free.
I think for me, it's conceptual revision. So instead of revising just the words, looking at your research with a fresh pair of eyes and just completely rewriting the whole thing. And yeah, actually revising and not just editing. So
I like how you pointed out the difference between those two, Sarah, which is a different process. Sometimes it's not minor tweaks or grammatical tweaks. It's, revisiting your whole thought process behind your research.
I would say for me, it would be criticism, constructive feedback, definitely reaching out to people within your department, but also people outside of your department, because somebody that's not a psychology major could become interested in my research and want to read up on it, but they're not aware of a lot of terms that psychology majors are used to using. They might not grasp the whole concept. So criticism really helped a lot throughout my process.
Yeah, and that's a big thing in the graduate PhD process, especially for those of you looking to publish. When you're doing peer review, when you have 4 to 5 different people reading your stuff and giving you feedback, being prepared to receive that criticism, which is helpful. The goal is to get you to a next step, a better place. Any additional?
For me, I feel like the biggest skill that I take is having passion for my writing. I feel like before this, I kind of just wrote things just to write it out. And, big shout out to Dr. Dyson for helping me look at like the bigger picture of a lot of things, especially with my research project, just having passion for it and having passion to make sure that you're actually enjoying writing and enjoying the research that you're doing. So that opened my eyes up a lot.
I would also say another thing I've learned would be to adapt. During research, it's very wise to be able to evolve with any other type of circumstances that go on. For instance, like the pandemic, and learning how to adapt and readjust yourself in your settings to make sure that you still succeed.
I wanted to jump in and say that I totally agree with Leighann. Learning how to use Zotero was like one of the most important things I did over my research. I don't know what it is. I hate like doing citations, but Zotero helped a lot.
I think that's a great segue. We have a new question that was added from one of our attendees. If you all can share, several of you mentioned at least Zotero. Are there other library databases or resources that you used for the very first time during your summer research experience? And what was that?
I utilize the UNCG library databases, and they can do major specific. So I did the kinesiology major, and I did research that way. They looked at many things like Google Scholars and stuff like that. And Zotero was a big one. And ZBib, which is another version of Zotero.
For my research, I use a lot with PsycInfo. It wasn't my first time using it, but it is a database for like psychology, scholarly articles. So that's my main database that I use throughout my research.
I got the chance to use a video platform called Atlas, and it just has a couple hundred videos of national board certified teachers in their classroom. And they have like a bunch of defined search results. So you can like click, you want to see Title I schools, you want to see rural schools, a bunch of different things. You can even limit it down to grade and subject matter. So using Atlas for the first time was like a great eye-opener.
Okay. We have a couple more questions that came in. Thank you. We have a question from Taishay. Hi, Taishay. What would you say to a student who is considering to apply to the McNair Scholars Program or participate in the undergraduate research at UNCG? Awesome question.
I would say, let me go back to the answer, our question. I would say if you are considering to apply to the McNair Scholars Program, I would definitely say to go ahead and do so. And once you are accepted, immediately try to find a mentor, because you need to make sure that your mentor aligns with your research project and you guys are compatible, since over the summer you will be working closely. And a mentor that also listens to your concerns and also helps you out throughout the process, because we're not familiar with research. And then I would also say to start on everything like your lit review and everything as soon as possible. Once you figure out your research question, just dive right in. I've been doing lit review and looking into other articles since maybe like my fall semester. And so it was like when the summer came, it was kind of just hands on deck, just all research. But I would say definitely make sure you have a compatible and great mentor. My mentor was amazing, and I was so lucky to have him because I did not know what I was doing. And having someone that helps with revisions and kind of just doesn't throw you in the deep end will really, it's really helpful.
Anyone else?
I think I would go off of Zhariah
Oh.
as well. Just finding a really supportive mentor that will support you, your research, your ideas, and allow you to develop research skills. So allowing you to do the research and them just giving you feedback and helping you really. So you're kind of like the star of the show. Making you a priority in the research.
I would say to potential McNair scholars I would tell them two things. One, definitely utilize your library mentor more than I did. My library mentor was Amy, and she killed it. She always sent me the articles that I needed, but I will say they are there for a reason, so use them, and they know what they're talking about. And then I would also say it's way more intense than you think it is. Like, going into it, I remember being reminded like around like week 4 or 5, you're gonna want to quit and just be like, I'm done. And I was like, no, I'm fine. Like, we're online. It won't even be that bad. But girl, be ready. Like, mostly just be prepared that you're gonna hit a wall. You might hit writer's block, and just don't be so hard on yourself when you get to that point.
Yeah, I smile hard at my scholars because this is an intense experience. And, you know, it's a learning process. And it's not just writing, but it's everything that goes into research. And, you know, hopefully this is something that you'll take with you to help further develop your skills as you pursue a PhD. But kudos and good job. I'm like beaming because y'all did so well through this intense experience. And shout outs, I'm seeing Joe also mention this, and several of our faculty mentors and library mentors are in attendance. And we will say this again, but shout outs and thank you to our faculty mentors and library mentors for the roles that you played in supporting our scholars through this process, through their learning experience. Are we ready to go to another question, friends? Cool. All right, we have another question from Jennifer Lingle. Did any of you find scholars in your readings within or outside of UNCG that have had an impact on you and perhaps your decision of where to apply for graduate school? So, did y'all see this question, or do you need me to read it again? So I'll read it again. I'm thinking, I don't know, is that a yes to read it again, or yes that you see it? No, I don't need to read it again.
We see it.
Awesome. So who wants to answer? Start us off.
I want to go just because I had a good experience with it. I found a scholar, a PhD, a researcher in the specific area that I want to go into. She's researching, her name is Frances Rosenbluth. She's teaching at Yale, and she does my exact area of study, which is the political economy of Japan. And there's not a lot of people who are researching that in the US at least, I mean, I could go to Japan, I could go to Australia, but in the US, there's only a couple of people. So I previously wasn't even thinking about Yale because it's a really big name and I'm kind of scared of it, but just it set me on a path to like look at what she's researching and who she's researching with. And so I found like a whole group of people and a whole group of schools that are supporting this kind of research, which is, and what I've been told so far, very important to know people that who are researching in your area and have things to say about your area and can really guide you in it. So that was probably one of the best experiences and research that I actually used in my paper from someone who's taking on students.
Anyone else?
I might not yet have limited down some graduate school options, but the program forced me to think about it. So I will say that I appreciate that because I mean, like grad school is a thing in my future, but it just seemed so distant, so far away that having to think about it and like having to look up programs definitely helped me.
I've looked into potentially applying to where Dr. Bonham research is at in California because my research is basically an extension of hers. She was the first to do like to provide experimental support for the Marley hypothesis by doing the intervention phase. So I have thought about potentially applying there to work up under her since I am really interested in the Marley hypothesis, coming from like many backgrounds within my family, and finding ways to change the perception gap of racism would be interesting.
For me, a big focus in my research is positive youth development through physical activity. And I've noticed that researchers that I've worked with overseas in Sri Lanka was Dr. Jen Jacobs and Dr. Paul Wright. And I noticed that a lot of the work, a lot of the work that I was putting in my literature review, but it was published by them. So I know that a lot of publications are going out from specifically Northern Illinois University. And I knew that that is probably the place that I would like to go just because I feel like they're very interactive and they do a lot for their students just because I've been on a research trip with them and they do a lot for their students. They're very focused on student success and getting their students involved in the type of work that they want to do for the rest of their life. And I knew that that is somewhere where I would like to be and I'd like to be supported the way that they support their students. So, yeah.
Are we ready to go on to the next question, friends? Nice. Have you for kudos? You have a kudos from Ethan Zell. And how have you thought? Well, not how. Sorry. Have you thought about when you might submit your projects for publication, and in what type of outlet?
Mine's supposed to be published by the time I graduate, so in May 2021 is when we're all due to graduate. I think so. But the outlet, is it just like a journal that we're publishing it to? I'm not really familiar. I just know that wherever Shailene posts hers is where I'll be posting mine, because she'll be like a co-author just so it can be like recognized in the psychology aspect and like in the psychology field with more people, because typically they won't read something by a person who only has like a bachelor's degree.
Thanks, Tatyana. Other thoughts?
Um, I'm not sure about publication, but I do know I want to publish. And I will be working closely with Dr. Zell for publication and a specific type of outlet. But I do know I'm hopefully once COVID clears up soon enough to definitely start doing some conferences. Um, but in specifics to publication, I do not have a specific deadline.
I think a goal of mine is just to publish my paper before I graduate. But if that doesn't happen, then I'm flexible to other dates as well.
Thanks, Sarah. Are we ready to go on to the next question? Yeah. How does your research speak to transforming the lives of people in a given context? Thank you, Dr. Dyson. That's a deep one.
I think for me, as far as my research, one thing I talked with Dr. Dyson about was inviting more Latino scholars to sit at the table, especially when it comes to explaining the history of Latinos and how we are affected within the public education system. So I think with this project and with this research, hopefully continuing everything, it allows for more people that look like me or people that identify as Latinx students to be able to sit at the table and be recognized and be able to share how they can contribute to today's society.
So including more communities not often thought about. Thank you. Other thoughts or responses about how your research can transform lives of the communities in your study or other communities?
This is a question I thought a lot about. Hearing from my fellow people in my cohort, they all have such big research projects that like talk about things that are affecting people really directly. And I almost felt like my research mattered less because it wasn't necessarily focusing on like one group of people that could be helped by it. But like during my research, seeing all the stuff that's happening and in Japan and some people who are actually being exploited by the Japanese government and how nothing is being done about it. And evil thrives in darkness. When we don't know things are happening, we don't stop them. So again, the fact that nobody had really been researching and seeing what was going on in this field to me was really, really important. That, I mean, Japan is the third largest economy in the world, and it's an important thing to think about what's happening to these immigrants when they get to Japan and how are they staying in Japan and how they're being treated by not only the Japanese government, by Japanese people. And I think it can help us answer broader questions about immigration in other countries that we consider to be like the good countries. What's happening in these places and how can we better protect people even if they're not from where we are.
I think it's also important to note that everything starts in school. So reforming our education system, I personally feel like should be one of our nation's top priorities for a very long time because we are continuously raising our future leaders. And if we fail to educate them appropriately, then we fail to have appropriate leaders.
I think for me, empowering my students to be leaders in society and make positive changes by transferring skills that they get through our program into their communities.
Okay. Are we ready to go to our next question? Cool. This is from Rod. Hi, Rod. Based on your research, were there any other areas, findings that were not discussed, which could be used in the near future to expand your research and add to the current body of scholarship?
For me, I know I talked with Rod about this, actually, is adding uh, a perception of from DACA students and from people who receive DACA, because I know when it comes to college and tuition, a lot of these students have to pay out-of-state tuition, which eventually leads them to not even going to college. So adding that perception into my research about how the system automatically fails them to not even be able to afford to go to college would be really good.
During my research, I also realized just how much socioeconomic factors play into public education and about how poverty keeps students from being able to learn. When you're thinking about where your next meal is coming from or who's going to pick you up from school or do you have clean clothes to wear the next day, you can't really think about the new algebra functions in math class or things like that. So I think that in going with solving our public education crisis, we also have to look at poverty and how that affects students in America and students all over the world. You can't really put school as a priority if your stomach is empty.
I think for me, I found a unique perspective on our program, and I found a finding that was called hardships, seeking help and safety. So I found a lot of students were utilizing different parts of our program in order to vent and express their concerns either for their community or just needing that space to talk about what's going on in their lives and expressing the hardships that they're going through and using it as a kind of like a relief, and using the resources like our relationships that we made in order to get their point across, if that makes sense. I made a well-defined definition about it that kind of goes more in depth, but I think that that was a very unique perspective that me as a student being close to their age, I was able to see that. And I felt like people that were older and maybe had were more focused on the point of the program, you can easily kind of look over that. So I was basically able to go more in depth and figure out that they want more out of the circle than the intent of the original circle. So I was able to go on that a little bit, kind of adding to the multi-contextuality of the circle process and hoping that there's a area that we can add on about specific hardships for students instead of just focusing on building community.
Any other thoughts to that question? Okay, seeing none, can I ask one more question? And then we can wrap up. I thought this was another cool question from the earlier panel. We gave shout outs to your faculty and library mentors and talked about the role that they played in your experience and in your study. How did you support each other as scholars throughout the summer research experience?
So I want to give a shout out to Leighann and Demi. I texted them 24/7, annoying them with all of my questions and just being like, hey, I'm super stressed out. And then like we'd remind each other of assignments. If we like didn't see one forget, we'd tell each other. So that was probably like the most important part. Or if Demi didn't see me in class because we had the same schedule, she'd be like, where are you at? Like, why aren't you here? She'd just check on me to like check on me mentally and I'd check on her. So that was probably like One of the other parts that really helped me get through SRI was those two girlies.
I would say that this cohort has been a major backbone for me throughout this whole process. Everyone, it's just like always positive vibes with each other. We're always hyping each other up, helping each other out, just always reminding each other like we can do this, just hold in there. Especially Sarah. Sarah has always been like, you guys got this, you can do it. Then Manny's always supporting along with Leighann, Joy. Jade has been probably like my biggest backbone throughout this. There's been so many times where like, I don't know if I can keep going. I'm just so tired. And it's like, I'm confused. I'm stuck at this point. And it's just honestly throughout this whole experience, you have to find like one person or at least a little group to just help you keep going, because this 8 weeks, it gets intensive. I mean, and then on top of that, we're at home. So like there's different other factors that are playing a role in our lives. But this cohort has really, and past cohort, I've been talking to some of them about their experience and how they can help me out as well. And just communicating and opening up about your problems that you're having will help you out in the future.
This cohort is definitely really amazing. Always positive energy from everybody. It's almost hard not to smile, especially in classes. And we just meet up, and it's just everyone's just always so positive, and it's just really cool to be around such amazing people.
It's really nice to know that you're not going through this alone. Like, if someone mentions that they have an issue, it's usually like 2 or 3 people are having the same issue at the same time. So it's so great to know that you have people right beside you who will support you and help you build yourself up and then help you solve the issue together as a group. So that has been great as well.
I was supposed to do SRI last year, but I was studying abroad. So like I had a cohort change and I was like all set to be with a whole different group of people. And I was a little bit bummed that a lot of the people I had known before weren't in my cohort. And then I met everybody in this cohort and I was like, never mind, these people are great too. The group chats, everybody was just always so positive, making everybody laugh, just like everybody was saying, to let us know that we weren't doing it by ourselves, that everybody else, when I was like, this is crazy, everybody was like, yeah, it's crazy. So I didn't feel so alone, and like there were other people who were supporting me.
I would definitely say throughout this experience, it was more so the classes that I needed a major boost with, just because like the GRE homework and then like trying to study, but also conduct your own research and then have meetings, it got very overwhelming. So having like little study groups, or Manny made flashcards for us and then sent us the links, so like just helping each other out, that was a lot of help as well.
That's so awesome to hear. Something to think about as a researcher and as you move forward. Community with other scholars, whether they're studying your same topic or not, a community with family and friends and folks to continue to support and uplift you through that process is always something to keep in mind. So I'm happy to hear. So as soon as I asked that question, several of you just like started smiling, and it's important to build a community you have with each other as scholars to support you through this journey. So that's awesome. That's the questions that we have. I don't see any other questions in the chat, so I think it's fair for us to say that we can close. And so thank you all for your time. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, attendees. I want to give you all as panelists some time to, and we can go in order of my screen, and I'll state your name, but is there anybody, maybe 1 or 2 folks, you want to share words of thanks and appreciation to? So your thank yous as we close our panel. Let's start with Sarah.
I want to thank the scholars for being my backbone, like Zhariah said. I want to thank my faculty mentor for being the most amazing person ever, Dr. Michael Hemphill. I respect him so much, and I feel like I would not be advancing as far as I have and as far as I look to advance without him. So he has definitely been my inspiration and my role model through this whole process, and I'm so glad that he was my mentor and he will be my mentor. I want him to hood me when I become a doctor, so yeah. And I also want to thank the McNair faculty and staff for giving me this opportunity to meet all these amazing people and to develop the way that I did during this SRI experience.
Leighann.
I definitely want to thank the cohort for always helping me. And when I send annoying memes in the group chat, they still respond. And I also want to thank my faculty mentor, Jennifer, for responding to my text at like 4 a.m. when I'm freaking out. She's great. She was awesome. So yeah.
Manny.
Definitely big shout out to the cohort. Y'all are awesome. Shout out to my mentors on this call, Caleb, Rod, and Dr. Dyson. Y'all are amazing. Thank y'all so much for investing in me, especially Rod. If it wasn't for you, I definitely wouldn't be here right now, because he definitely pushed me to do the application. And, you know, big shout out to them for always pushing me and helping me get to where I need to be and seeing, you know, where I need to be at. So big thank you to you guys for investing in me.
Awesome. Zhariah.
I would like to say thank you to Dr. Zell. We've been working a lot throughout the school semester, and then having him also move over into the summer with me with this research project. I would like to say thank you for helping me do all those revisions and push me to be the student that I am becoming, and also believing in me with my graduate pursuit. I would like to thank the cohort for always being there for me, and also the McNair staff for giving us this opportunity to actually conduct research to see what it's like as an undergraduate. So when we go into grad school, we're just not thrown out into the water.
Awesome. Joy.
With everyone else, I want to thank the cohort for being so amazing this whole entire time, and the McNair staff for giving us the opportunity. Also, I really want to thank my mentor, Dr. Gregory McAvoy, for working with me. When I asked him if he would be my mentor, he was just like, yeah, sure. That incredible grace and just very quick to say yes and quick to answer all of my many questions. And when I said, I'm thinking about grad school, he was like, yeah, we'll look over your application materials and we'll help you out. So I really appreciate all of that. And big shout out to my family, because our house is small and I'm loud. So the fact that they didn't get upset with me during these 8 weeks and all of my research, and when they can't understand what I'm talking about, I'm speaking in Japanese or something. The fact that here goes my headphone, where they acted like they still loved me even during this experience. So shout out to all of those people.
Awesome. And Tatyana.
I just want to say thank you to the cohort. We kept each other afloat this whole time. I know it was really hard and we wanted to quit, but we didn't let each other. I want to thank Carla because I was emailing her nonstop this entire time and she didn't get annoyed with me. And I also want to thank Gavin because without him, he's the one who told me about McNair. He just randomly brought it up one day and he was like, why don't you apply? And we had a whole conversation about it. And he kept pushing me to apply. So I'm thankful for him. And then I really want to thank my mentor because when I had all my breakdowns about SRI and my paper, she'd just be like, call me. And we'd have plenty of calls where she'd calm me down because she knows I stress a lot over everything. So she finds ways to relieve my stress and just talk to me about everything to kind of just calm me down. So I'm really thankful for her and everything she's done.
Well, on behalf of the McNair program, thank you. Thank you, scholars, for your time, for your persistence, for your brilliance. And I encourage you to know that, remember that we appreciate you, we support you, and we're very, very proud of you. So if you have not done so yet, give yourselves a round of applause. And if I can ask our attendees to give some virtual applause for our scholars. Great job and thank you. Thank you to, again, our faculty mentors, our library mentors, our family who may be in the background hearing us, friends who supported our scholars, other mentors and advisors, life coaches, and folks near and far who support our scholars. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you to our attendees who are on the call and everyone who played a role in the scholars' process and success over the summer. You all did an amazing job. As you can see, read the shout outs in the chat, folks. See how everyone's super proud of you during this process. And thank you again. I'm going to stop the recording now. And once again, thank you for attending the 2020 UNCG McNair Virtual Symposium.